Good afternoon, everybody. Today I'm chatting with David Morgan. Guys, I'm always thrilled when David hops on here because our audience, first off, loves having David on here. The views are usually really big. But secondly, it's always a casual conversation where David speaks to us just on a human level about everything that's happening in the world. I think we could all agree that our governments are spending too much money. They're taxing us too much. And for a lot of us, we look around and we see our standard of living continue to decline year over year. And I think that one thing that most of us can agree on that are at least watching a show like this or listening to David speak is that the central banking policies that have happened around the world are the root cause of a lot of the problems that we see in our economic worlds. So in this interview, we discuss what's happening in the world, how central banks have impacted our standards of living, what we should do as people to try to make the best of the situation we're in. And also we get into where David thinks that the price of gold could be heading and his assessment of what's happening right now in the precious metals markets. All right, everybody, enjoy the interview. David, thanks so much for hopping on again.
Stu, it's good to be back.
So a lot's happened since the last time you and I chatted. I'm going to start with some of the stuff that just happened last week. Here in Canada, the Liberal government announced their budget last week. And in it, they announced that they are going to be taxing capital gains from 50% income tax coverage to 67%. So a 33% hike in how much taxes you're going to have to pay on capital gains moving forward. And I think that when we look at what's happened here in Canada, and I don't know if you've been following any of it or not, but there's a bigger theme here. And that's this, that people have this idea that we can just tax the rich more. And I think in a place like Canada, where we have been leaning so far left, and we don't really have a lot of businesses. When you look up Canada on companiesmarketcap.com and you sort it by country, almost all of our institutions that are in the top 20 are big banks, insurance companies, and a few companies who just take stuff out of the ground. But we don't really have productive industries. So like, I'm sure that there's some wealthy people that we could tax here in Canada. But my fear when I look at it is that we're basically just going to be taxing doctors and dentists and perhaps some lawyers, but there's here in Canada, we don't have the same wealth that you guys have in the States. And I'm just curious, do you think that this is going to be a theme that we're going to see moving forward in the Western world? This idea that, hey, let's just try to tax the rich more, and that's going to make up for our government's lack of fiscal prudence?
Well, there's two parts to that question. Yes, I agree that I think governments are short on funds because they've overspent and they've deficit spended for so long, and then the interest rates are high. So the cost of money, the interest rate, makes it more costly to function or to service the debt. So there's much more pressure on governments to get more money any way they can. So it sounds good to some people that, oh, well, we'll just tax the rich. Well, the problem is you can tax the billionaire class 100%, and it really doesn't do that much. There's been study on that over and over again. And really, I think the whole income tax structure, no matter what part of the planet it's on, the US, Canada, wherever it exists, is really due for a major overhaul. The best way to really get funds to run the government, which I'm not anti-government, but I like to give as much freedom as possible. And government basically is force. They usually force you to do something you wouldn't normally do. You normally wouldn't just say, hey, I'm going to increase my corporate tax rate. But coming back on point, make it based on consumption, which means that there is a national sales tax. That way you don't have to fill out a form. You don't have to worry about if you're getting the exact rate or what your write-offs are, or collecting all these receipts or whatever. You want to buy a Lamborghini, it's a higher tax rate than buying a Volkswagen. Or maybe it's the same tax rate, which would be probably the most fair. Same tax rate, but you're going to pay more for a Lamborghini. So someone like me that's kind of outgrown, I got to have, the best car. I'm not out to impress the girls as much anymore. I'm going to buy the souped up diesel Volkswagen on the used market, and I'm going to spend my money on apartment buildings. So the point being is there's freedom of choice in that purchase, which means you still have your freedom. It's not a set forced issue that you make this much, you owe this much, which is how the system is more or less set up. I know I'm simplifying it, but I think a national sales tax. So those people that want to conserve and save more are going to pay less tax. And those people that have, a need or want to have, more luxury items, okay, they pay for it. So what? At least you have the ability to make up your own damn mind what you want to do with your own money. Whereas, again, the way it's set up now, people are always trying to outthink the government, or what can I do? What can I tax shelter? Or what can I do? What can the artwork can I buy for 10 grand and mark it up to 100 grand and give it away to a charity? And all these games that get played all the time. So I think it'd be a lot more refreshing to everybody on more or less a level playing field, and that we just did it based on what we spent.
So this is an interesting idea that I just came across yesterday. I was driving with my family, and my wife pulled up this thing called the World Happiness Index, and I don't know if you ever heard of it before.
I have.
And so she started talking about it, and I said, "Okay, I see these things all the time," and kind of brushed it off. But then she started actually citing some of the statistics, and she said something that I thought was really, really fascinating, and that was that if we look at here in Canada, if we look at the World Happiness Index for Canadians who are above 60, Canada ranks 8th in the world. But if we go for people under 30, Canada ranks 58th. Now, if we do the US, if we go over 60, the happiness index for Americans over 60 is 10th in the world. But if you're under 30, 62nd in the world. Do you think it says something about this economic structure that we've created and the political system that we've created that has really sold out young people? Do you think this is just the way technology has changed and young people are kind of doomed? What do you think's happening here, and why do you think there's such a discrepancy between the happiness level of old Americans and Canadians versus young Americans and Canadians?
Well, my thoughts are this. There's been an ideological shift that's been so significant and so apparent that's why you get those numbers. Because when I was young, when I was under 30, the idea of the American dream actually held some weight. You had the idea that you might not be able to do absolutely anything, but the dream was still there. If you worked hard, got a good job, you're an entrepreneur, you could achieve above and beyond what maybe the lifestyle your parents had. And really, they talk about happiness. It comes down to lifestyle, but there's a caveat. And I thought, in fact, you were going to say this, Steve. I forget the numbers, so I'll just give the idea. But after you make X amount, anything above and beyond that, 2 or 3 or 4 times, doesn't add to your happiness. Actually, in most cases, it takes away from it. In other words, if you get too much of what you don't need, which might be X amount of money or X amount of retirement, you start to get into the worry factor, because you worry, is someone taking your money, or do you trust them? Are they after you, or are they after your money, or whatever? So there's kind of that sweet spot where you make enough and you have a good life. You get to do what you want. You have a freedom-based existence. You choose your own friends. You choose your own meals. You choose whatever. The world's your oyster. You're open to everything. There's abundance. There's a feeling of abundance. There's a feeling that there's enough. Well, that shifted. I mean, most people under 30, whatever place, US, Canada, or others, are like, I'm working 2 jobs and I don't stand a chance of getting my own house. The only way I'm going to get a house is not working 3 jobs, but maybe marrying somebody that has money or has such a good job that we can pool our resources together. And with 3 jobs, we can buy a house, that kind of thing. So the basic dream is gone. The dream really is, you have to be asleep to believe in it, as George Carlin says. We're in a position where we failed. And I did this on a public radio station here in town. There was a financial planner that had me come in about every other month, talk about precious metals, because even though he was a total CFP, which is kind of how I started in the business, I left shortly after working under one. But regardless of what I did, he still was a believer in having a small portion of metals, which is what I've advocated. I've never said you got to go all in. And I said on that show that I really felt that we, the baby boomers, owed an apology to the millennials and younger because of the misallocation of capital and not keeping our integrity. I mean, if we were fiscally responsible, we wouldn't be borrowing all the money that we have, putting you guys in further debt. and the end sound engineer was behind glass, and then we had a break, right? Because it's a commercial radio station. You have to do the weather and the news and the, and so the break came up. The guy just flipped out, pulled off his headphones, and talked to me through the mic. I said, man, I've never heard anybody do that. It's not about me, but it's about my generation. I mean, when I started off, I was an engineer. I was pretty conservative. I still am. And we were all driving Hondas and carpooling because the first gas shortage happened. So we're thinking, how can we fix this? Well, we can fix it by getting a car, instead of getting 10 miles a gallon, gets 40. And in that car that gets 40 miles a gallon, we put 4 people in. And we did that. And I kind of had this hope, or the dream is we could still live a great, good life. We could still have a lot of freedom, but we've just got to alter our lifestyle somewhat, but you still get to work. In fact, in a way, the carpools are kind of fun because you got to express ideas and have good conversations and all that. And that kind of went away, and I was no hippie by a long shot, but the idea of we had to do something and we could. And that just kind of faded away. And the next thing you know, slip another 10 years ahead and everybody's got to drive an SUV. Well, what happened to driving a Honda is getting 40 miles to the gallon. So the whole thing, I've watched it shift. I mean, I'm more of, the Honda driver type of person, or thinking, what can we do that doesn't really hurt me, helps others, and still get from A to B, right? But now all these people that drive SUVs, I mean, 99.2% of them never go off road, but it's cool. It's cool. You got to have an SUV to be cool, right?
I hate that SUVs got so popular. I'm a minivan guy, and now hardly anybody makes minivans, and they're actually kind of hard to get your hands on. But in terms of practicality, anyways.
I'll slip in there just because we're having a conversation. I was a late bloomer. I mean, I was 40 when my first daughter was born, and had my second daughter a year and a half later. And I love the minivan. I bought it brand new. It was the extended version. It had built-in car seats. You could get them in and out, being protected in a jiffy. All that room in the back to put all kinds of crap, sporting gear. I mean, they both played soccer and groceries. I mean, I love the darn thing, and I wasn't embarrassed to drive a minivan at all. I loved it. So, to me, it was far more practical than having a cool SUV. I mean, that thing had doors. It was the first year that they had doors that opened on both sides. So it opened one door, put one daughter in, open the other door, put the other daughter in, lock them down, get ready to roll and on our way. So practical.
Yeah.
Practical.
No, hardly anybody's making them though. So since I think we last spoke, there's been a lot of, let's just say, there's been a lot of political events. It started out in February 2022. China and Russia declares a no limits partnership, which I don't know if you follow Kyle Bass, but I don't think he can get through an interview without talking about that announcement. Then shortly after, Russia walks into Ukraine. 2 years later, Hamas goes into a music festival in Israel. And obviously there's a bit of a bad event that happens there, and indirectly Iran gets tied in, and now we have Iran and Israel fighting. We assume that a lot of stuff we're reading sounds like China is certainly, it's on the table, the idea that they may walk into Taiwan, but in the background China's been stockpiling commodities. And you can't help but wonder if there is this concerted effort amongst various countries to say, how can we have the US write as many checks as possible and send as much money around the world as possible to fight all these different wars? Well, at the same time, we're going to stockpile commodities. And what impact is that going to have on the US dollar? And I'm wondering, do you think that this is a concerted effort by a bunch of these countries to try to dethrone the US dollar? Or do you think that this is just the way that it's played out?
Well, I think all wars are bankers' wars. I did a series of interviews on that theme. It came from I think it's Michael Rivera that made the documentary "All Wars Are Bankers' Wars," and he makes a good case for that. So I think it is a construct overall. Now, when you make a an agenda, let's say, it doesn't always go as mapped out. There are variables that are unforeseen or the result of unforeseen consequences, et cetera. But overall, yeah, the way the U.S. broke up the Soviet Union was by bankrupting them, by having them spend too much on defense. And so now that's kind of played out in reverse. These other countries are having to pay too much on defense. The cost of money is at 5% roughly, and long bonds worth a lot less because higher interest rates, yada yada, what we talked about, Steve. So yeah, I think if it's bankers' wars and they're controlling, let's say, both sides, you can agree or disagree, but just as a thought experiment, say they are, then what's the goal? Well, the goal is to bankrupt the U.S. and start a reset and start over again where you're in charge. Bankers very seldom lose in these things. One side loses, both sides lose in a war. Nobody wins in a war. The only one that really does is maybe the banking institutions. I mean, you look at, the Bush family, and they were indicted for trading with the Enemies Act. I mean, during the Second World War. So there's a lot behind the scenes that most people aren't aware of. So my case is, yeah, I think you outlined it well. I mean, that's basically what's going on. And where does it lead? Well, no one knows for certain, but my studied view is it leads to the reset. We have a new system. It's a new US dollar, maybe a CBDC, maybe it's a North American alliance with Canada, the US, and Mexico. Maybe it's a global currency right off the bat, which I doubt. I think they're going to ease us into it, but it's going to mitigate a lot of these issues that we have with the current system and put people back on the road to, in quotes, prosperity.
It's frustrating because we see, like here in Canada, we see our government, they announced the budget and they're going to continue to rack up big deficits into an inflationary environment where interest rates have been the highest that they've been in 25, 30 years. There's one chart that I saw, and we'll throw this up if the editor can put this up, where for the first time in about, I think, 20 years in Canada, the GST we collect, so that's the tax. When you've been in Canada before, David, you probably noticed that you had to pay a little tax when you buy something. So it's for the first time in about 20 years, 25 years, GST collected in Canada is now lower than the debt service charges. So we're now paying more in interest every year than we are in GST collected. And then, that's just one statistic, but it just goes to show you how bad things have gotten and how far we've fallen. And there seems to be no interest in the government's part to actually rein in this spending. And again, the proof is in the pudding when you see the happiness indicator of, and my belief when I look at that is what that represents is it represents a lot of young people who see generations older than them that had a much higher standard of living that they will never be able to achieve, and how depressing and hopeless that feels for them. And then they look at the government that is just spending money recklessly while raising taxes, meaning that they're going to tax productivity. They don't really love taxing people who have the unrealized gains, by the way. They can go take on debt, leverage, do whatever they want. But the people who are actually doing productive things, they're more than happy to tax like crazy. And if you're a young person living in the West, it's so unbelievably frustrating to see what's happening. And I agree. I can't imagine that we aren't near the end game of this monetary system where the politicians have just like the idea of austerity or fiscal prudence. It's over at this point. They just do whatever they want. They're passing spending bill after spending bill in the U.S. So over the weekend, what was like a $70 billion package, and these things are just like, it's just happening regularly. The stimulus packages are bigger and bigger. And at this point, we've just sort of all accepted it, and it is what it is. And I think we're going to wake up one day, and everything's going to be a lot more expensive, and there's going to be rioting in the streets when people can't afford to eat. And like here in Canada, I don't know what it's like where you are in Washington, but here in the Toronto area, we're seeing homeless encampments all over the place. We used to never see these. They're now in every suburb, and you go downtown, they're all over the place. And it seems like we have governments that don't understand that they're causing these problems?
Well, the homeless issue is growing rapidly almost everywhere. It's here in the U.S. and to get homeless in the northern climates is, it's fairly rare, meaning it's so doggone cold that, in the wintertime you could freeze to death if you don't have any heat. But no, it's a very, very sad situation. And the main complaint we get in the U.S. that I see, of course, I don't look at the mainstream news very often. I do occasionally, but is that the feedback is this, just plain and simple. It's not me saying it, although I'm reporting it. We're spending all this money on these wars, and yet we're not taking care of people at home. We're defending the border of Ukraine, but we're not defending our own border. I mean, these are the kind of things you see pop up in the alt media over and over again. Is we're getting all this money taken out of our paychecks and it's going to foreign countries, not here at home. Why aren't we helping our own? And I think that's a valid statement. I mean, why aren't we helping our own? The old adage that God helps those who help themselves. Charity begins at home. I rather give a handout or I don't like the handout thing, although sometimes it's necessary. Soup kitchens, that kind of thing. I'm not against that at all. I got a pretty big heart. I'm pretty compassionate, but I much prefer a hand up than a handout. Give them a bowl of soup and a training to be able to be a welder, or you know what I'm saying, Steve. I mean, good to keep them going and love them unconditionally. But if you just give them food over and over, teach them to fish, don't give them fish. So give them a fish so that they learn how to fish. That's my attitude. It's always been that, because now you've got some potential, not contributor to society, although that's kind of in the background for my thinking. It's more of personal dignity where you wake up and you're excited to be alive because now you've got something that you like to do. You like to weld under water or whatever the hell it might.
I think you raise a good point, and we just look around, and it just goes to tell you how broken our economic system has gotten. There's people out there who don't have jobs here in Canada. I don't know if you saw the op-ed that Bill Maher ran a couple of weeks ago about what's happened to the Canadian economy, but the level of immigration we've brought in is last year we brought in 1.2 million immigrants, which would be the equivalent of the U.S. bringing in like 13 million immigrants in 1 year. And whenever there's a job opening, the people often take videos and they post them on TikTok. There'll be like 3 job openings at a liquor store in London, Ontario, and there's like 150 people lined up just to hand in their resume. And then we have these encampments, and here we have this huge housing shortage, which you would think would mean, why don't we get these people working in the trades and building houses, which we so desperately need? But our economic system is so broken that for some reason we can't seem to connect those dots.
Exactly. No, I mean, going back to my youth and, driving the Hondas and being more conservative and knowing that, we should be, careful with what the resources. In other words, what I like to use the word over and over is the misallocation of capital. And when you spend money on worthless projects that go nowhere or do nothing for the good of the common good, then you shouldn't have begun it in the first place. And it comes back to early days of, I can't remember the name of it, but I think it was an offshoot. And it basically was, I was your age or younger, and it was a quick TV clip. And it showed the U.S. sending shovels, rakes, hoes, hand implements to, the poor in Africa. Granted, hand farming is not only hard labor, but it is as productive as corporate farming. But at least you're getting them started. But now, you just send money, or so you send food as well. But, I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole. I'm not really studied in this. But the idea is there's been a shift in my generation from when I got out of college, and we really did, give a helping hand, a hand up. And we were also mitigating our lifestyles for the benefit of all and still having a great one. And that just, like I said, I don't know where it clicked off. Like Max Kaiser says, maybe when disco hit, but there was some point, and everyone's driving an SUV and doesn't care what the gas mileage is. And, to think you get a freeway down here. I don't know if they do it in Canada. I've been to Canada many, many times. 40% of my subscriber base is Canadian. But, Down here we've got these little diamond lanes, which means if you have two people or more in the car, you can get in a special lane and have less traffic to battle going to a big city or in or out. Well, two, I mean, if we were using our brains and really conserving and not worrying about the strategic stockpile of gasoline because we're all, you know, carpooling, we wouldn't have to worry probably about a strategic petroleum reserve. But it's a lot of selfishness. It's me, I. I got to drive my big SUV by my. I don't want to share it or whatever. And this is an attitude that was being forced upon us now that we've gone too far. Now that there's a true breakdown in the not only the supply chain but the production lines across the board. I mean, there's lots we could go deeper on why, which I don't care to touch on. The facts are, less food production, less consumption on certain things, less availability, and just being priced out of the market. I mean, there's people that, just cannot buy healthy food anymore because it costs too damn much. So they get in a high carb diet without enough, a balanced diet, and it causes health problems. It's costs them even more. I mean, we could be so much better than we are with a few, there'd be major changes, but governments doesn't, any government, I'm not talking about Canadian, I'm not talking about the US, I'm talking about all government, are forcing their citizenry into their agenda, which, as you said, is basically the super austerity program where you own nothing and you're going to be happy. And the way you do that is what was outlined in Brave New World, Huxley's book. And hey, what you do is you just drug the hell out of them, so everybody's high as a kite and you're feeling happy, and put a video game on front of them. And, I'm being somewhat facetious, but not too much. I mean, that's kind of the outline.
Now, David, we haven't talked about precious metals yet. You are considered one of the top thought leaders out there on precious metals. We've had quite a run in gold over the last year. I know it's down at the time we're talking. I've heard some theories that could have something to do with the Shanghai exchanges and some of the margin requirements that they put down. Perhaps it has something to do with de-escalating tensions in the Middle East. But still, the theme seems to be apparent here that gold seems to be catching some strength. What's your thoughts on what's happening in the gold market right now?
Well, gold has definitely made a breakout, and there's round numbers are important to commodities. And so if 2000 was the ceiling and now it's the floor, you've got a whole new attitude toward gold investment, which means if gold gets near the 2000 level, it's a buy because or you believe strongly it's going to go higher. And, the advocate for precious metals are basically freedom. I mean, one of my most popular videos has to do with I got a couple of new people in the business that made some good remarks about what was going on in the financial system. But I said in the middle of that video, but no matter how much free money, honest money you have, gold or silver, it makes no difference in the long run if we've lost our freedom. If you can't say what you need to say or want to say, go where you want to go, believe what you want to believe. In other words, if you've lost your freedom, it doesn't matter how much real money you got or how rich you are, because freedom is priceless. And this is the direction. I made that video over 10 years ago before we started to see more and more what I've been witnessing, which is, censorship on both sides. The left says, oh, you can't say that, but the right does the same thing. And so you've got a situation where we've become less and less humane toward each other. Everyone seems to have to pick a side. No one seems to be able to take a deep breath, get centered, and take in, both arguments, and maybe remain neutral. Maybe, and making things that are not that important, top run news, and things that really are important, like feeding our own people, housing our own people. How often do you hear that on the mainstream news? You don't. You hear about the war escalating. You hear about somebody doing some weird, protest or whatever, or what the alternative sexual orientations are, or whatever. I mean, things that exist, but how much emphasis does it have on being kind to each other or being, more of a human being grateful. What do we have to be grateful for? Community centers. You don't get you might occasionally, especially on a local news channel, but on the mainstream, you're going to get, Steve started a homeless camp and everybody's getting taught on a volunteer basis. I'm not getting paid for this, but I'm teaching anyone who wants to learn how to arc weld. That's a skill that's a tough one, but once you learn it, it's a highly paid skill and it's needed. But you don't hear that stuff. All you get is gloom, doom, and the banking crisis. And I'm part of it too. I mean, I admit that I've been worried about the financial system from the time I found out how it worked. And I knew it was a rigged game and that you cannot go exponential on anything without it failing at some point. And when you have a compound interest, what some like Warren Buffett call the eighth wonder of the world, it is. But it only goes for so long and then it breaks. And that's why I believe in the Bible, you had a jubilee every 50 years because you could go about 50 years of compound interest and then reset and everybody gets their land back or whatever. And you start over and you don't get too far out of control. But we've gone to a point now where, there's billionaires and some of these bankers are probably trillionaires. And you've got this wealth disparity between the 1% or the 0.5% and everybody else. And this is where you really see from history a great breakdown in society because it comes into two classes, the haves and the have-nots. And when the WEF is saying you own nothing to be happy, they're pretty much signaling what the agenda looks like.
Well, David, you've been really generous with your time today. Is there anything that you're up to that you can plug I'll
interrupt. I'm doing a documentary, setting out to do another book. The documentary is called silversunrise.tv, and it has to do with what we're talking here at the end, about the stress of money. You look up on Google worldwide, what is the number one most stressful thing for people on the planet? The search I did, it may have changed by now, is like 85% of the people are stressed about money. Because when you think about it, money transcends nation state, ideology, it's sexual orientation, age. Everybody's worried about their money because we're the only species on the planet that has to earn a living or have money in order to eat or have shelter or whatever. And I'm even looking at, do we even need a monetary system? Which sounds like, really bizarre from a guy that's advocated honest money his whole life. I do think that the metals are probably our best transition where the power of money is into people's pockets, if it could go that far, which I kind of doubt. But nonetheless, that's been my goal, is to put the power of money back into people's hands, take it out of the bankers' hands, where we get to make our own decisions. But anyway, back to the movie. Just go to silversunrise.tv. You can watch a couple of the trailers there. And it's about the stress of money and overcoming what we can do, some of the things we talked about, Stephen, what we can do individually and together to benefit and help each other to make this place really a better place and not worry so much about, where the next meal is coming from. Because we have an attitude of scarcity, but the universe is all abundant. It's infinite. And if we take the attitude that we have infinite ability and we have the ability to tap into, let's say, infinite energy that's free or next to it, we could provide energy worldwide, like many say Tesla was saying he could do. If that is true or something close to that is true, we could turn this thing upside down on its head very quickly, because money does not make the world go round. Energy does. And if we could get energies in abundance for everyone that wanted it, we could really, really do wonders for everyone.
Well, David, it's always great chatting with you. Our audience loves it when you come on here. So we're always grateful that you take the time to chat with us. One of our favorite guests to have on here. So thank you very much for doing this. And I wish you the best of health over the remainder of the year. And hopefully you'll keep coming back on here, because I know our audience can't get enough of it.
Well, thank you, Steve. Appreciate it.
Thanks, David.
You're welcome.
All right, everyone. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this interview, please smash that like button, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. Also, let me know what you think in the comment section. Thanks, everyone.